They said it like it was nothing, like I should be honored. Guard the house tonight. 4 simple words delivered by my husband Michael as he stood in the doorway. Keys in hand, his mother Vivian behind him, with that thin smile that always felt like a blade. I was 32 years old, not a teenager begging for a role in the family drama. But in their eyes, I was always less than the outsider who should be grateful for scraps of belonging. Guard the house tonight. They made it sound like a responsibility, a duty bestowed upon me, but the way Derek, my brother-in-law, laughed as he pulled on his boots told me it was something else. The snow was already falling outside, thick flakes swirling under the yellow porch light, the forecast warning of one of the worst blizzards in a decade. I wrapped my cardigan tighter, my thin gloves doing little against the creeping cold that slipped in through the cracks of the old house. I told Michael that the storm looked dangerous, that maybe we should all just stay in. He didn't answer. Vivian brushed past me and muttered, "We will be late." And Derek smirked as if he knew a joke I was not allowed to hear. The front door closed. Their taillights vanished into the white darkness, leaving me alone with the silence of a house that never felt like mine. For an hour, I sat in the living room, the wind groaning against the windows, trying to convince myself I was exaggerating, that they would return soon, that maybe, just maybe, tonight would not end like all the other nights of ridicule and quiet bruises. I made tea, my hands shaking as I poured and stared at the clock. Midnight approached. The storm outside howled louder, snow piling against the door. I thought of calling someone, but my phone had vanished earlier that day from the kitchen counter, and when I asked Michael, he said I probably misplaced it again. Gaslighting always came wrapped as concern. I told myself to breathe, to wait, but then I heard the sound. The lock clicked. I froze. Slowly I rose, heart pounding, and walked to the front door. The knob refused to turn. I tried again, rattling harder, but it was useless. Locked. My purse, my ID, my winter boots all inside. Only me, a cardigan, and thin socks against the storm. At first I thought it was a mistake. I knocked whispered hello into the empty house, prayed someone had returned and would open up. No answer. Instead, I heard laughter echo faintly through the wall, high-pitched and cruel, like Derek had stayed behind waiting for this moment. And then, without warning, the back door slammed open. Heavy boots stomped across the floor, and before I could react, Michael appeared, his face shadowed, but his smile sharp. "Guard the house," he repeated mockingly, and before I could step back, he shoved me with both hands. I stumbled, slipped on the icy porch, and then his boot connected with my ribs. The force sent me sprawling into the snow, air punched out of my lungs, a scream catching in my throat. The cold swallowed me instantly. Snow seeped into my clothes, my hair biting my skin with merciless teeth. I tried to crawl back, but the door slammed shut, and the lock clicked again, final, absolute. My fingers clawed at the wood until the skin split, blood smearing against the white paint. Inside, I heard voices, muffled laughing. Derek chanting something like a cruel nursery rhyme. Vivian telling them to hurry or they would be late. My body shook violently, not just from the cold, but from the realization that this was not abandonment. This was punishment. This was their message I was disposable. The snow thickened, wind shrieking through the trees, ice biting into my cheeks. I tried to stand, my knees wobbling, pain burning in my side where Michael's boot had landed. My hands were already numb, turning stiff, the tips blanching pale against the storm. Frostbite. The word cut through my mind like a siren. I had studied enough first aid once to know what came after blisters blackened flesh amputation. A young woman in her 30s was not supposed to be thinking about losing fingers and toes, but here I was crawling through snow like a discarded animal. My breath came in short gasps, crystallizing instantly in the air. I screamed for help, but the storm swallowed my voice, carrying it away into the darkness. Every step forward felt like dragging lead across ice. My cardigan hung heavy with frozen moisture, my teeth clattering so hard my jaw ached. In that moment, one thought screamed louder than the storm: they wanted me dead. Not slowly, not subtly, not in the suffocating way of silence and gaslighting, but brutally coldly with the storm as their accomplice. I pressed my bleeding hand to my ribs, staggered toward the faint glow of a neighbor's porch light, and swore through chattering teeth that if I survived this night, I would never again mistake their cruelty for family. They said it like it was nothing, like I should be honored. Guard the house tonight. 4 simple words delivered by my husband Michael as he stood in the doorway, keys in hand, his mother Vivian behind him, with that thin smile that always felt like a blade. I was 32 years old, not a teenager begging for a role in the family drama. But in their eyes, I was always less than the outsider who should be grateful for scraps of belonging. Guard the house tonight. They made it sound like a responsibility, a duty bestowed upon me. But the way Derek, my brother-in-law, laughed as he pulled on his boots told me it was something else. The snow was already falling outside, thick flakes swirling under the yellow porch light, the forecast warning of one of the worst blizzards in a decade. I wrapped my cardigan tighter, my thin gloves doing little against the creeping cold that slipped in through the cracks of the old house. I told Michael that the storm looked dangerous, that maybe we should all just stay in. He didn't answer. Vivian brushed past me and muttered, "We will be late." And Derek smirked as if he knew a joke I was not allowed to hear. The front door closed. Their taillights vanished into the white darkness, leaving me alone with the silence of a house that never felt like mine. For an hour, I sat in the living room, the wind groaning against the windows, trying to convince myself I was exaggerating, that they would return soon, that maybe, just maybe, tonight would not end, like all the other nights of ridicule and quiet bruises. I made tea, my hands shaking as I poured and stared at the clock. Midnight approached. The storm outside howled louder, snow piling against the door. I thought of calling someone, but my phone had vanished earlier that day from the kitchen counter, and when I asked Michael, he said I probably misplaced it again. Gaslighting always came wrapped as concern. I told myself to breathe, to wait, but then I heard the sound. The lock clicked. I froze. Slowly, I rose, heart pounding, and walked to the front door. The knob refused to turn. I tried again, rattling harder, but it was useless. Locked. My purse, my ID, my winter boots all inside. Only me, a cardigan, and thin socks against the storm. At first I thought it was a mistake. I knocked whispered hello into the empty house, prayed someone had returned and would open up. No answer. Instead I heard laughter echo faintly through the wall, high-pitched and cruel, like Derek had stayed behind waiting for this moment. And then, without warning, the back door slammed open. Heavy boots stomped across the floor, and before I could react, Michael appeared, his face shadowed, but his smile sharp. "Guard the house," he repeated mockingly, and before I could step back, he shoved me with both hands. I stumbled, slipped on the icy porch, and then his boot connected with my ribs. The force sent me sprawling into the snow, air punched out of my lungs, a scream catching in my throat. The cold swallowed me instantly. Snow seeped into my clothes, my hair biting my skin with merciless teeth. I tried to crawl back, but the door slammed shut, and the lock clicked again. Final absolute. My fingers clawed at the wood until the skin split, blood smearing against the white paint. Inside, I heard voices, muffled laughing, Derek chanting something like a cruel nursery rhyme, Vivian telling them to hurry, or they would be late. My body shook violently, not just from the cold, but from the realization that this was not abandonment. This was punishment. This was their message I was disposable. The snow-thickened wind shrieking through the trees, ice biting into my cheeks. I tried to stand, my knees wobbling, pain burning in my side where Michael's boot had landed. My hands were already numb, turning stiff, the tips blanching pale against the storm. Frostbite. The word cut through my mind like a siren. I had studied enough first aid once to know what came after blisters, blackened flesh amputation. A young woman in her 30s was not supposed to be thinking about losing fingers and toes, but here I was crawling through snow like a discarded animal. My breath came in short gasps, crystallizing instantly in the air. I screamed for help, but the storm swallowed my voice, carrying it away into the darkness. Every step forward felt like dragging lead across ice. My cardigan hung heavy with frozen moisture, my teeth clattering so hard my jaw ached. In that moment, one thought screamed louder than the storm. They wanted me dead. Not slowly, not subtly, not in the suffocating way of silence and gaslighting, but brutally coldly with the storm as their accomplice. I pressed my bleeding hand to my ribs, staggered toward the faint glow of a neighbor's porch light, and swore through chattering teeth that if I survived this night, I would never again mistake their cruelty for family. Before the frostbite gnawed at my fingers, there were years of smaller storms, quieter wounds, the kind that did not leave scars on the skin, but carved deep into the bone. I was 29 when I met Michael Handsome in a crisp white shirt at a charity dinner, the kind of man who spoke with confidence that filled the room. He told me he admired my independence, my ideas, the way I carried myself, and for a while I believed him. He courted me with flowers, late-night phone calls, promises of a future where I would never have to worry again. After a year, we married, and I thought I was stepping into a partnership, but what I entered was a cage disguised as a home. His mother, Vivian, ran the household like a queen with her court every decision hers to make, and though she smiled at me on the wedding day, her eyes were cold, assessing as if she had acquired a servant instead of a daughter-in-law. She began with little correction suggestions, she called them. That dress does not suit you, Clara. Wear something more modest. That laugh is too loud. Speak softer. It is unladylike to draw attention. At first, I obeyed because I wanted to belong, because Michael said she only meant well. Then came the rules. No perfume in the house, it triggers her allergies. No using the washer after 9, it disrupts her sleep. No friends visiting the neighbors might talk. I swallowed each restriction like bitter pills, telling myself marriage required compromise. But compromise became submission, and submission became erasure. Michael, once attentive, grew distant, his affection turning conditional. He said it was easier if he handled our finances, called it budgeting for our comfort. But comfort meant a small allowance, while he controlled my salary, our savings, every cent that passed through our accounts. When I questioned him, he kissed my forehead and said, "You worry too much. Let me take care of you." When I pressed harder, he snapped, and the first slap landed across my cheek so fast I thought I had imagined it. His apology came later. Flowers again, a whispered promise, but apologies turned to excuses, excuses to silence, silence to threats. Vivian always defended him, her voice smooth as poison. He did not mean it, Clara. You should not provoke him. If you were more supportive, he would not lose his temper. And Derek, the younger brother who never worked a steady job, hung around the house like a shadow. His laughter sharp, his eyes lingering too long, his words taunting. He once cornered me in the hallway and whispered, "You think you belong here. You are just furniture. We can move when we please." I told Michael, desperate for protection, but he waved it off with a chuckle, said Derek was joking, I should not be so dramatic. Gaslighting became the air I breathed. I was told my memory was faulty, my emotions unstable, my needs excessive. Each time I tried to assert myself, the walls closed in tighter. They took my phone when I argued too much, claiming they would keep it safe. They forbade me from applying to jobs, saying the household needed me, but really it was about keeping me tethered dependent. When I cried, Vivian patted my hand with feigned sympathy and murmured, "Families are hard, but you are lucky we keep you." I began to doubt my own worth, began to wonder if maybe they were right. Maybe I was too fragile, too weak, too ungrateful. But then came the bruises that no words could erase. Michael shoved me against the wall one night when I refused to hand over the last $50 from my purse. Derek once pushed me down the steps when I told him to leave my room. Vivian saw the bruises, saw the limp, and she looked away sipping her tea, as if the sight did not matter. They conditioned me to silence, and I obeyed because silence seemed safer than confrontation. But silence is not safety, it is surrender. Those years built the path to that storm, each insult, each slap, each sneer laying the foundation. When they told me to guard the house that night, it was not sudden cruelty. It was the culmination of years of soft violence hardening into steel. They wanted me to believe I deserved it, that being kicked into a blizzard was a natural extension of my failures. But even as frostbite claimed my hands, even as blood froze against the snow, part of me understood at last I had been erased slowly, piece by piece, until the storm was only their final stroke. And if I lived, I would piece myself back together sharper than before, unignorable, undeniable. The storm did not care about justice. It only cared about swallowing me, and as I dragged myself further from the house, I felt the cold sear through my bones until I could no longer tell where my body ended and the snow began. My ribs ached with every breath, each inhale a stab of pain, each exhale a ghostly cloud, snatched away by the wind. The night was black and white and endless, the kind of void that devoured time, and I knew if I stopped moving, I would become just another frozen shape hidden by morning drifts. My fingers were stiff claws purple at the tips, nails broken from scraping the door, and when I tried to bend them, they refused to obey. Frostbite was already setting its claim, a silent thief eating me alive. I thought of Michael's face as he shoved me, the casual cruelty in his eyes, the way Derek laughed from the shadows, the way Vivian pretended it was all discipline, all for my own good. They did not just want me gone. They wanted me erased, left as a nameless headline. Woman lost in storm. Another tragedy blamed on nature instead of family. The thought fueled me rage, burning hot enough to keep my legs moving, though each step was agony. I staggered across the yard, the wind knocking me sideways, slamming me into a drift that buried me waist deep. I clawed out snow, filling my mouth, choking me until I vomited bitter bile that froze as soon as it touched the ground. I screamed, the sound ragged, torn from my throat, but no one came. No one answered, only the shriek of wind and the crunch of ice collapsing under my weight. I tried to focus on the faint light I had seen, that fragile glow on a distant porch, but it flickered in and out, taunting, as though the storm wanted to steal even that hope from me. My legs buckled again, and I fell hard onto my knees, pain exploding through my already bruised body. For a moment, I wanted to lie there, to surrender, to let the snow cover me like a blanket, to let my last breath slip silently into the night. But then I heard it, faint but unmistakable, Michael's voice in my memory, sneering, "You could not survive a day without us." Derek's mocking chant, "She's weak, she's weak." Vivian's cold whisper, "You should be grateful we keep you." The words echoed in my skull louder than the storm, and something inside me refused to let them be right. I slammed my fists into the snow, forced myself up, teeth clenched so hard they cracked and lurched forward. The pain in my toes was gone, now replaced by numbness, which terrified me more than agony, because numbness meant death creeping closer. I tore off my soaked socks, bare feet slapping against ice, skin splitting. But at least pain returned, proof that I was still fighting. My vision blurred, darkness crowding at the edges, but the light ahead grew sharper, no longer a mirage. I screamed again, not for help this time, but as a war cry, a declaration to the storm, and to them that I would not vanish quietly. Snow lashed my face. My lips cracked open, blood mixing with ice, but I kept moving, crawling when I could not walk, dragging myself like a wounded animal. And then I reached it. The porch steps slick with ice, the railing crusted with frost. I collapsed against it, chest heaving, my body convulsing with shivers so violent I thought my bones would shatter. I pounded weakly on the door, each knock softer than the last, until my hands were just resting there, trembling, the wood stained with my blood. For a heartbeat, I thought no one would answer, that I had fought this far only to die at the threshold. My eyes fluttered shut, darkness pulling me under, when suddenly a light snapped on inside. The door opened, warm air spilling out, and a figure appeared, blurred at first, then clear. Nora Hayes, the neighbor widow, her face pale with shock as she saw me, collapsed on her porch. "Mercy, Clara!" She gasped, and her hands pulled me inside before the storm could claim me. The heat of her house hit me like fire. Too much, my skin screaming as feeling returned in cruel waves. But it was life. It was proof. It was survival. My last thought before I blacked out was simple and sharp. I had lived, and because I lived, they would answer for what they had done. When consciousness returned, it was not gentle. It was a violent rush of heat and pain, my skin burning as though knives of fire were piercing every fingertip and toe, the cruel revival of frozen flesh. I opened my eyes to find myself wrapped in blankets, steam rising from a pot on the stove, the scent of chamomile and honey drifting through the air. And above me, Nora Hayes, her silver hair damp from the snow, her eyes fierce with both fear and determination. She pressed a warm cloth against my hands, whispering, "Stay with me, Clara. Do not drift off. You have to stay awake." My teeth clattered so violently I could barely form words, but I managed to choke out, "They locked me out. They kicked me out. They wanted me dead." Nora's face hardened not with disbelief, but with recognition, as though she had seen this cruelty before. She tucked the blanket tighter around me, slid a mug of steaming tea into my shaking hands, and said, "I know what kind of family does this. I know because once long ago mine did the same." Her words cut through the fog like a blade. She called the doctor on her landline, her voice sharp and commanding, telling them there was a young woman with frostbite bruises, possible broken ribs. Within the hour, a paramedic team arrived carrying me onto a stretcher, their voices urgent, counting vitals, wrapping my hands and feet in protective gauze. As they wheeled me out, I caught sight of my reflection in the hallway mirror. My face pale and battered lips cracked and bloody eyes hollow, but still burning with something that had not died in the storm. At the hospital, the fluorescent lights were too bright, the antiseptic smell cloying, but the nurses moved quickly, peeling away my soaked clothes, sliding IV lines into my arms, placing heating pads along my body. I lay there shivering, half-conscious, listening as the doctor explained frostbite, the risk of losing skin, maybe worse, the bruising consistent with blunt force trauma. They asked who had done this, who had left me in the storm, and I opened my mouth, but no words came, because the fear of their power still clung to me like ice. Later, Nora sat by my bed, her hand steady over mine, and she whispered, "They will tell you you are overreacting. They will tell you no one will believe you. But I believe you, Clara. And if you want to fight back, I will stand with you." Her presence anchored me. She was not blood, not bound by obligation, but she was the first true family I had felt in years. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm of bandages, painkillers, and whispered conversations with Nora. She told me about her late husband, how he had controlled her every step, how she had escaped only after he died. She said she saw the same cage closing around me, and she would not let me slip back inside. When Michael came to the hospital 2 days later pretending concern bringing roses, as if a bouquet could hide the truth Nora was there, she stood at my bedside like a sentinel, her glare slicing through his false smile. "Clara needs rest," she said firmly. "You should leave." Michael's jaw tightened, his eyes flicking toward me with silent rage, but he left his footsteps sharp against the linoleum. Nora leaned close and whispered, "That was not love on his face. That was fear of losing control. And fear is where you can begin to break him." That night, as the wind outside howled softer than the blizzard that nearly claimed me, I realized I had an ally, not just someone who saved my life, but someone who would help me take it back. I lay awake, my body aching, but my mind sharper than it had been in years, and I swore that I would not crawl back into silence, not this time. I had survived the storm, and survival was the first weapon in the war I was about to wage. The hospital room was quiet, except for the steady beeping of the monitor and the faint hum of the heating unit. Yet inside my head, there was a storm louder than the one that had tried to kill me. Lying there with my hands swaddled in gauze, my ribs aching each time I breathed, memories surged back in sharp fragments, moments I had buried under excuses and false hope. I saw Michael's face twisted in anger the night he first raised his hand, the slap that left my cheek burning while he whispered an apology minutes later, claiming stress from work. I remember Derek cornering me near the stairwell, his grin wide as he shoved me just enough to send me tumbling down 2 steps, laughing as he said it was just a joke. I remembered Vivian sitting at the dining table, her perfectly manicured nails tapping the wood as she declared in her cold voice that discipline was love, that I should thank Michael for keeping me on the right path. Each scene layered over the next, not isolated incidents, but a pattern, a map of control drawn across years of my life. And through it all, I remembered my own voice, smaller, every time whispering excuses to myself, telling friends I was busy, telling coworkers I preferred staying home, telling the mirror that maybe I was too sensitive, too weak, too demanding. But in this sterile room, with the evidence of their cruelty written across my battered body, I could no longer deny the truth. They had not simply made mistakes, they had engineered a prison. Gaslighting had been their walls, financial control, their locks, violence, their final weapon. I saw it clearly now. Each restriction, each insult, each bruise had been another brick. The storm was only the culmination, the moment they stopped pretending altogether. And the most terrifying realization was not that they wanted me gone, but that they believed I would accept it, that I would lie down in the snow and never rise again. That thought filled me with a fury so hot it cut through the fog of pain. They believed me disposable, but I had survived, and survival meant I had power they never expected. Nora's words echoed in my mind, her voice steady. They will not stop until you stop them. I thought of the years I had wasted bending myself into shapes to please them, of the friends I had lost, of the career I had abandoned. I thought of the bruises I covered with long sleeves, the bank account I no longer controlled, the phone taken from my hands as if I were a child. The weight of all that loss pressed down on me, but instead of breaking me, it sharpened me. I would not surrender another day, another breath, another piece of myself to them. The nurse entered briefly, checking my vitals, adjusting the IV drip. But even as she moved about the room, I was lost in the avalanche of memory. I saw myself as a younger woman, laughing freely before Michael's voice taught me to hush, smiling without fear. Before Vivian's judgment turned every gesture into shame, standing upright before Derek's shove reminded me how easily I could be broken. I clenched my fists against the bandages, pain jolting up my arms, and I welcomed it. Because pain meant I was alive, and being alive meant I had choices. The storm had stripped everything away, my safety, my illusions, my silence. What remained was raw truth, and raw truth demanded action. As the hours stretched into morning, I stared at the ceiling and whispered to myself, never again. Never again would I excuse their cruelty. Never again would I trade my dignity for the illusion of family. Never again would I let their voices drown out my own. By the time Nora returned with a thermos of coffee and that unyielding look in her eyes, I knew something had shifted inside me. I was no longer the woman who cowered in hallways or begged for scraps of affection. I was the woman who had walked out of a blizzard alive, and that meant I was ready to fight. The day I was discharged from the hospital, the cold air outside still bit at my cheeks, but this time it no longer terrified me. It reminded me I had endured worse and walked out alive. Nora insisted on driving me home with her, not to the Mitchell house, but to her small brick cottage that smelled of cedar and old books, a place that felt warmer than any room I had lived in for years. She laid out tea and blankets, and then, without asking permission, set a leather notebook on the table and slid a pen across to me. Write it down every time, every bruise, every word, every dollar. Do not trust memory, trust paper. I stared at the blank page, my hand trembling, then began. The words poured like blood from an open vein, years of swallowed pain spilling into ink. I wrote about the first slap, about Derek's shove, about Vivian's rules that cut my world smaller each month. I wrote about the bank accounts I no longer had access to, the friends I was forbidden to see, the phone that vanished from my hands. I wrote about the night of the storm, the kick that left me breathless, the snow that tried to bury me. Hours passed, the pages filled, and for the first time I saw the pattern clearly, not isolated incidents, but a chain of abuse forged link by link. Nora read silently, her lips pressed tight, and when I finished, she nodded once. Good. Now we turn this into weapons. The next step was evidence. With her help, I photographed every bruise, the swelling across my ribs, the frostbitten tips of my fingers. She pressed gently but firmly, lift your shirt, turn your arm, show the marks. And though shame burned my face, I obeyed because shame was their tool, not mine. We stored each image in a hidden flash drive she kept in her desk. She called a friend, Martin Alvarez, a lawyer known for handling domestic violence and financial abuse cases. And 2 days later, he sat across from me in Nora's kitchen, his eyes sharp but kind. He asked questions I once would have flinched from. How often did he strike you? How much money did he control? Who witnessed the abuse? My voice shook, but I answered. And with each answer, the cage I had been trapped in became visible not just to me, but to someone who could dismantle it. Martin laid out a plan: medical reports to prove injury, photos for corroboration, financial statements to show theft, and recordings if I could capture them. Recordings. The word lingered. I remembered Michael's threats whispered in the dark, Derek's laughter. When he shoved me, Vivian's cold voice excusing every cruelty. They had become so sure of my silence, they never hid their words. If I could catch them speaking, I could destroy their facade. Nora handed me a small device barely larger than a pen, and told me to keep it close to turn it on whenever I went near them again. Fear clawed at me at the thought of facing them, but beneath the fear was a fiercer determination. They had stolen years, but they would not steal justice. That night, as I lay in Nora's guest room, surrounded by the quiet safety of her home, I whispered to myself, "You are not powerless, you are preparing." And for the first time in years, I slept without flinching at every sound, because I knew the storm had not ended me, it had armed me. I knew returning to that house was dangerous, but every part of me screamed that I could not move forward without reclaiming what was mine: my documents, my identification, the pieces of myself they had kept locked away. Martin told me it was risky but necessary, and Nora insisted she would come with me, her presence a shield. The drive back was silent except for the rattle of the old heater in her car, my hands clenching the small recorder hidden in my coat pocket. As the house came into view, my chest tightened. Memories of that night crashing over me, the porch where I had fallen, the door that slammed, the laughter muffled by walls. But this time I was not crawling. This time I was walking in, with fire in my veins. I rang the bell, the chime echoing like a challenge, and the door opened to reveal Vivian, her expression frozen in disdain. "Clara," she said slowly, as if tasting poison, "you should not be here." I held her gaze and answered, "I came for my documents, the ones you promised were safe." Her lips thinned, but she stepped aside just enough for me to enter. The air inside smelled of polish and artificial citrus, cold and sharp, a mockery of comfort. Derek lounged on the couch, his smirk widening as he saw me. "Well, look who crawled back, the Snow Queen herself." Michael emerged from the hallway, his eyes narrowing, his jaw tense. "You have some nerve showing up here?" I ignored his words and repeated, "My documents, social security card, passport, everything. Now." Vivian folded her arms. "You think you can just walk in and demand things? You should be grateful we took care of you at all." Anger burned hot, but I kept my voice steady. "You did not take care of me. You caged me, and now I am done." Michael's hand shot out, grabbing my arm, squeezing hard enough to bruise. "You will not speak to my mother that way." His face was inches from mine, his breath hot with fury, and for the first time I did not shrink. I leaned closer, whispered just loud enough for the recorder in my pocket to catch. "You put me in the storm, you kicked me until I could not breathe, and one day you will answer for it." His grip tightened, rage spilling over, and he shoved me against the wall. Derek laughed, clapping like an audience. Vivian's eyes darted nervously, but she said nothing. I winced, pain flashing through my ribs, but I forced my voice calm. "Every word you say, every move you make, I am keeping it all. You think I am weak, but I am not silent anymore." Michael froze for half a second, his eyes flicking to my coat pocket as if he sensed the trap. Then he hissed, "If you ever try to ruin this family, I will kill you." The words dropped heavy into the air, undeniable, final. I met his gaze and said, "Thank you," because that is exactly what I needed to hear. Vivian gasped, realizing too late the weight of what had just been spoken. She hurried away and returned with a manila envelope, thrusting it into my hands. "Take it and leave," she snapped, her voice trembling. But Michael lunged again, only to stop when Nora stepped forward, her phone in hand, already dialing. "Enough," she said firmly, her voice sharp as steel. "I will not watch another second of this." For a moment, silence hung thick. Then Michael released me, his glare promising war. I clutched the envelope to my chest, my recorder still humming quietly in my pocket, and walked out the door without looking back. Outside, the air was frigid, but it felt cleaner, sharper, like the first breath after surfacing from deep water. Nora squeezed my shoulder as we reached the car and whispered, "You did it, Clara. You got what you needed." And I knew she was right because tucked inside my coat were not just documents, but proof words that would one day break their fortress apart. I thought after that confrontation they might back down. That fear of exposure would force them into silence. But instead, they turned outward, twisting the story until their poison spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Within days, whispers followed me, pitying glances disguised as curiosity, neighbors murmuring that Clara had gone hysterical, that Michael's wife had lost her mind in the storm, that she was unstable and ungrateful. Vivian orchestrated it with the precision of a general hosting coffee mornings, where she sighed heavily and told anyone who would listen that I had wandered out on my own, that the cold had clouded my judgment, that poor Michael was doing everything he could to support a wife who refused to accept help. Derek embellished with cruel laughter, spinning tales of me screaming nonsense, claiming I accused them of attempted murder, when all they had done was try to care for me. Their voices spread faster than truth ever could, and soon even the barista at the cafe gave me a wary look when I ordered tea. Each glance felt like another cage, another attempt to push me back into silence, to make me doubt the reality I had bled for. But this time was different. I had recordings, photographs, medical reports, documents in my own name. I had allies. Still, the gaslighting hurt because they did not just attack me privately, they attacked my reputation, trying to erase me from the world beyond their walls. One afternoon, I saw Michael at the grocery store. His cart piled high with food, his smile too polished as he greeted an older woman from church. He leaned close to her, his voice pitched just loud enough for me to hear, saying, "She is not well. You know the storm confused her. She says things that are not true." His eyes flicked to mine with smug satisfaction, daring me to cause a scene. I clenched my fists, fury boiling, but I kept walking because my war was not in the aisles. It was in the courtroom where truth would not be dismissed as hysteria. Nora reminded me nightly, "Let them talk. Clara, let them weave their lies, because every word will rot when faced with evidence." And Martin assured me gaslighting is common, but judges look at proof, not gossip. Even so, nights were hardest. I lay awake hearing their voices in my head, hearing Vivian's cool tone, telling the world that I was dramatic, unstable, broken. I questioned myself, wondered if people believed them, wondered if the jury of neighbors would matter more than the jury of law. But then I played the recording again, Michael's voice sharp and venomous. "If you ever try to ruin this family, I will kill you." The words steadied me. They were undeniable. No amount of whispered lies could erase the threat of murder spoken aloud. So I gathered more. Every time Michael called, every time Derek sent a message, every time Vivian showed up at Nora's doorstep with false sympathy, I recorded, documented, archived. Each encounter became another nail in their coffin. And when Martin filed the restraining order attaching medical reports, photographs, and that damning recording, I felt the first true breath of justice. But with every step forward, their desperation grew. Michael left voicemails dripping with venom, promising I would regret this. Vivian spread rumors that I had seduced other men, that I was unfaithful, trying to paint me as immoral. Derek even drove past Nora's house at night, revving his engine, shouting obscenities into the dark. Their gaslighting was no longer just whispers, it was a campaign. And yet the more they tried to smear me, the more obvious their fear became. They thought they were breaking me, but what they were really doing was tightening the noose around their own necks. Because when lies are shouted loud enough, they leave echoes, and echoes are evidence too. The courthouse smelled of old wood and stale coffee, its halls buzzing with the low murmur of people waiting for their names to be called. But for me, every sound was thunder in my chest. I sat beside Nora and Martin, clutching the folder that contained my life pages of photographs, medical reports, bank statements, and the small recorder that had captured Michael's voice in all its venom. Across the room, Michael sat with Vivian and Derek, their suits too crisp, their expressions carefully arranged into masks of concern. Vivian whispered into the ear of their lawyer, a tall man with a gleaming tie, who glanced at me with calculated disdain, while Derek smirked openly as if the whole process was a joke. Michael avoided my eyes, but his jaw clenched with every passing minute, the only sign of the rage simmering beneath his polished exterior. When my case was called and we entered the courtroom proper, I felt the weight of every stare pressed down on me, but I forced my spine straight. This was no longer their narrative, this was mine. The judge listened as Martin laid out the facts, his voice steady, presenting each piece of evidence. In order, the medical charts detailing bruised ribs and frostbite, the photographs of my injuries, the financial statements showing my salary siphoned into accounts I could not access, and finally, the recording. The courtroom went still as Michael's voice crackled to life, cold and unmistakable. "If you ever try to ruin this family, I will kill you." The words echoed through the chamber like a gunshot, undeniable, irrefutable. I watched Michael's face pale, watched Vivian's mask crack for the first time, her hand clutching her pearls as though she could strangle the truth back into silence. Derek shifted uncomfortably, his smirk faltering. Their lawyer scrambled, objecting, claiming the recording was taken out of context, that the words were exaggerated, that I was manipulating the narrative. But the judge silenced him with a raised hand. "Context," he said firmly, "does not erase threat." Then it was my turn. I stood trembling but determined and told my story in one long, breathless stream. I spoke of the first slap, the gaslighting, the financial control the night of the storm, the kick that sent me sprawling into snow, the crawl to survival. My voice broke, but I kept going, because silence had nearly killed me once, and I would not let it claim me again. The courtroom was quiet, except for the scratch of the clerk's pen, the sound of my own heartbeat roaring in my ears. When I finished, I looked directly at Michael and said, "You wanted me erased, but I am still here, and I will not disappear again." The judge leaned back, his expression unreadable, but when he spoke, his words were iron. "Based on the evidence presented, this court grants a restraining order. Effective, immediately revokes all financial access granted to the defendant, and refers the matter for criminal investigation regarding threats of bodily harm." The gavel struck, and the sound reverberated like thunder, final and absolute. Vivian gasped as though slapped. Derek muttered a curse under his breath, and Michael finally looked at me, his eyes wide, not with love or regret, but with fear. For the first time, he understood he had lost control. As bailiffs approached to escort him out for questioning, he hissed, "You will pay for this, Clara!" But the words no longer had power. They were not threats. They were confessions. And confessions are chains. Nora squeezed my hand, her eyes wet with pride, and Martin whispered, "This is just the beginning, but today you won." Walking out of that courthouse, the winter sun cutting through the clouds, I felt something I had not felt in years. Justice was not just a dream whispered into the dark. It was real. It was mine, and it had come crashing down on them, like the storm they once tried to bury me in. The days that followed the court ruling unfolded like watching a fortress crumble brick by brick, slow at first, but then all at once. And for the first time, I stood outside that fortress, no longer trembling, but steady, waiting for the collapse. News spread quickly, not the whispered gossip Vivian had once controlled, but official reports, articles in the local paper quoting the judge's words, the transcript of Michael's threat played back for all to hear. The neighbors who once eyed me with suspicion now shifted uncomfortably when we passed their murmurs, no longer about my supposed hysteria, but about the Mitchells' disgrace. Michael was suspended from his job after his employer received the restraining order, his name whispered in the office halls as liability, his polished image shattered overnight. Vivian lost her position in the church committee. When recordings of her dismissive comments were leaked, her reputation for piety undone by her own cruelty. Derek, cocky and untouchable for so long, found himself questioned by police after I presented additional recordings of his harassment. His sneering laughter turned into evidence of intimidation. Their house, once the grand stage where they ruled, became a prison of shame. Reporters lingered on the street. Neighbors avoided their driveway invitations, stopped arriving. I heard from Nora that Vivian screamed at the mailman one morning for daring to look at her too long, her mask cracking under the weight of exposure. The whispers they had used to isolate me became knives turned inward, cutting their standing their pride, their carefully constructed lies. But the most devastating blow came when Michael was charged with assault and threatening bodily harm. His court date set his bail conditions strict. I saw him once more in passing, escorted out of the police station, his wrists bound in cuffs, and our eyes met for a brief second. There was no love, no regret, only a hollow fury. But beneath it, I saw something new, the realization that he was powerless, that I had stripped him of the control he once wielded like a weapon. Vivian tried to rally, writing letters to officials insisting her son was misunderstood, but each attempt only drew more attention to the evidence stacked against them. Derek vanished for weeks, hiding with friends, too ashamed to show his face in town. Their empire of gaslighting, built on silence and fear, had collapsed under the weight of truth, and the rubble was theirs to live in. Meanwhile, I reclaimed piece by piece what they had stolen. The bank returned full control of my accounts. The lawyer finalized documents that ensured no one could touch my assets without my consent, and the hospital confirmed my medical bills would be covered by the court order as part of restitution. For the first time in years, my name was mine again, not hidden under Michael's authority, not dismissed under Vivian's judgment. I moved into a small apartment above a florist shop, sunlight streaming through wide windows, the scent of fresh flowers drifting upstairs each morning. It was not grand, it was not polished, but it was mine, and that made it palatial. I hung my documents in a small fireproof safe, a quiet declaration that my identity could no longer be stripped from me. At night, when I sat with a mug of tea on the balcony, I listened to the wind and thought of the blizzard, thought of the night they tried to erase me. The storm had not ended me, it had freed me, because survival had turned into evidence, and evidence had turned into justice. Their downfall was not just punishment, it was proof. Proof that gaslighting can be shattered, that silence can be broken, that justice, though slow, arrives with teeth. And as I watched the Mitchell house from afar, its windows dark, its curtains drawn tight against the stairs of the town, I knew their downfall was only beginning, because reputations once broken do not mend, and fear once exposed cannot be hidden again. When the trial ended and the restraining order became permanent, I expected relief to crash over me like a wave. But what I felt instead was quieter, a steady warmth spreading through me like sunlight after too many seasons of winter. Nora insisted I mark the moment not with silence, but with something visible, something that declared to the world that I had survived and would no longer be hidden. So together we stitched a banner from scraps of fabric she had kept in her sewing basket, uneven pieces of blue and gold sewn with thick black thread, spelling out 3 words: I am still here. We hung it from the balcony of my apartment, the letters catching the morning sun, the fabric swaying in the breeze like a flag of defiance. People noticed. Neighbors who had once believed Vivian's whispers paused to stare. Some nodded, some smiled, a few even knocked on my door to say they were sorry they had doubted. One woman pressed my hand and whispered that she too had been silenced in her marriage for years, and that seeing the banner made her feel less alone. Each conversation was a thread weaving me back into a community I thought I had lost. Healing did not come all at once. It came in small moments: the first time I walked into the grocery store without flinching, the first time I laughed without waiting for someone to hush me, the first time I left my phone on the counter, without fear it would vanish. I started writing again, long letters to myself in a notebook. Not lists of what they demanded from me, but dreams of what I wanted: travel work, friendships, freedom. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future without their shadows. Justice had stripped them of power, but healing required me to reclaim joy. I joined a support group at the community center, sitting in a circle of women who shared stories of bruises and silence of escape and survival. I told my story too, my voice trembling at first, but growing stronger with each word. And when I finished, the room was silent before one woman whispered, "You gave me courage." Tears burned my eyes because I realized survival was not only for me, it was for others who needed to see that storms can be endured and that gaslighting can be dismantled. One evening, Eloise, my niece, knocked on my door with a bag of groceries and eyes red from crying. She hugged me fiercely and said, "I did not know what they were doing to you. I only saw glimpses, and I am so sorry." I told her she was not to blame, that she had been raised in their lies, and she stayed the night sitting with me on the balcony under the banner, telling me she wanted to be better, to be different. That was the deepest healing of all, to know that the cycle could be broken, that the next generation could choose differently. I spoke at the town hall months later when asked to share about domestic violence, my hands shaking as I stood at the podium. But when I looked out at the faces, many tear-streaked, I felt stronger than ever. I told them the truth, that love without respect is not love, that silence is not peace, that family can be the cruelest prison when loyalty is twisted into chains. When I finished, the room rose in applause, and in that sound I felt something release the last remnants of shame dissolving into pride. I was no longer defined by what they had done to me. I was defined by what I had chosen to do after. Healing, I realized, is not forgetting, but reclaiming. And every word I spoke, every stitch of the banner, every laugh shared in Nora's kitchen was reclamation. The Mitchells had tried to bury me in a storm, but I had risen, and rising was the purest revenge. The first spring in my new apartment came with the smell of lilacs drifting up from the florist below, and the sound of laughter spilling from open windows. And I realized that seasons no longer terrified me, that winter had lost its power over me, because I had walked through the worst of it and come out the other side. I kept the banner on my balcony, faded now from sun and rain, but still bold enough to remind me every morning that survival is not a quiet thing. It is a declaration. Michael was convicted of assault and given time in county jail. His career ruined, his name now spoken with pity instead of respect. Vivian withdrew from the community she once ruled, her sharp tongue useless without listeners. Her invitations ignored, her reputation crumbled. Derek fled to another city, whispers of his violence chasing him, jobs lost because of background checks, and the internet that never forgets. Their house stood, but it was no longer a fortress. It was a hollow shell, its blinds drawn, its garden overgrown, its silence heavy with disgrace. I did not need to go near it because it was no longer part of my story, only part of my past. My story was here in the apartment, filled with books I chose for myself, in the tea mugs that matched nothing but felt right in my hands, in the laughter of Eloise when she visited, in the steady presence of Nora, who became more than a neighbor. She became family by choice. We planted herbs on the balcony, we stitched new banners just for joy, and we filled the kitchen with the smell of cinnamon and bread. Healing was not perfect. There were nights when I woke sweating from dreams of snow and locked doors, but those nights grew fewer. And when they came, I would rise, make tea, and write reminders to myself: you survived, you fought back, you are free. I kept the recorder in a small box, not because I needed it now, but because it reminded me of the night I stopped being silent, the night I turned their threats into their downfall. One afternoon, Eloise asked if she could bring her friends by to meet me, saying she wanted them to hear my story, and I said yes, because telling the truth no longer felt like reopening a wound. It felt like planting seeds. They listened wide-eyed, and when one of them whispered that her aunt was going through something similar, I felt a purpose spark inside me. Pain turned into power, survival turned into service, and that was the final victory to transform what was meant to break me into something that could help others rise. Standing on the balcony that evening, watching the banner ripple in the wind, I thought of the girl who once whispered apologies into the silence of a house that hated her, who once believed she was too weak to stand alone. That girl was gone, replaced by a woman who had faced a storm meant to kill her, and instead built a life on the ashes of their cruelty. If someone asked me now where I lived, I would answer simply: above a florist, beneath a banner, in a place where no one tells me when to speak, and in a voice I no longer ask permission to use. I live here, I am still here, and I am not going anywhere.